Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition or episode of the Hare Krishna Project podcast. This is episode number 81. We are very fastly, is that a word? We are very quickly moving towards episode number 100. We should reach that all-important 100th episode in around 5 to 6 weeks' time. But today, I'm pleased to be bringing to you episode number 81. Thank you to everyone who continues to tune in on a regular basis to hear what our guests from not just Great Britain, but all over the world have to say. And we've had some fascinating guests recently from different parts of the world. We've been to Germany, we've been to the USA, and today we are back to Britain. That could be like a marketing slogan, couldn't it? Back to Britain. I'm sure someone's used it in the past. And we're going to Leicester, one of my favorite places. I think Leicester has the highest number of Hindu temples in the UK, but I'm not sure. Our guest is nodding. Possibly it's true. So I'm delighted to welcome our guest all the way from Leicester. Please welcome Jack. Hare Krishna, Jack.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. Been following the podcast for a little while, so it's a really nice opportunity to come on here and speak to you in person.
It's great to have you with us, and it's great to know you've been watching the podcast, so each of them have at least one view, which is which is fantastic. And I appreciate you coming on. Jack, I'm going to start with a nice easy question. It's the question I ask every single guest. Please tell us a bit about you and where you're from.
Okay. My name's Jack. I grew up in the southeast, not far from Cambridge. And when I was 18, I came to Leicester to start university. Since 2005, when I started, I've continued to live here. I have 3 children who live with me and my partner here. Yeah, I'm very happy here. This Leicester, I grew up in a very sort of culturally kind of insular town. It was very sort of, not very much happened, kind of classic kind of small town energy going on there. And my parents are from cities. My mum's from Birmingham, my dad's from Liverpool. And so I grew up around cities and bigger places. And I always knew I wanted to go somewhere a bit more vibrant with more interesting things going on. And Leicester was the sort of the right size as well. It wasn't too big, wasn't too small, but also I just knew that it was a very interesting place from a cultural perspective. And it would give me a lot of experiences that I wouldn't have growing up where I was.
So you moved to Leicester in 2005 to do your degree.
Yeah, I did, yes.
I have to say, I thought, and I don't know your age exactly, I could work it out, but you're older than I thought you were.
Okay.
You look younger. It's a compliment. You look quite a bit younger, actually, than your age. I finished my degree in 2005, so technically there's only 3 years between us in age.
Yes, yeah, I'm 36, so
36. I'm 39. I'm 39.
Okay.
So you're from a kind of rural, possibly middle-class background in kind of Cambridgeshire, and you've moved to Leicester of all places, and you've got this whole kind of explosion of different cultures and colours and all these things happening. What did you study at university?
I read history and politics, and then I actually went on and did my PhD in history as well. So yeah, historian by trade. So.
Wow, you've got a PhD?
I do, yes.
Oh, I should call you Dr. Jack.
Well, if you like.
Dr. Jack, I absolutely love that. I wanted to do a PhD. It was on my list once, but I just never got round to it. Okay, and did you, I mean, I'm a bit of a tangent here. What did you what kind of history, because history is obviously a very big subject. What did you specialize in?
I specialized in, I suppose broadly, I was specializing in sort of social and economic history of the 18th and 19th centuries. But my PhD was actually on banknote forgery and how people were learning to understand money, and it fed into lots of different literatures like credit and print and all these kind of things. So like most PhDs, it sounds incredibly specific, but it also has a much broader remit into the literature. So 80,000 words seems a lot, but when you actually do 3 years of 2+ years of research, you end up realizing you haven't got as many as you thought you did. And I ended up leaving out a whole chapter anyway. So it's yes.
Wow, that's fascinating. A doctor, you have a PhD in history. I'm just thinking, I know nothing about economics, the history of economics or anything like that, or social issues in the 18th or 20th centuries.
18th, 19th century.
18th, 19th. Very little about it. Okay. So you moved to Leicester in 2005. You obviously got involved with the city. You saw it was very different from kind of your background. How did you, at a later point in your life, how did you discover Krishna consciousness or meet the devotees?
So it did come quite a lot later, and I'll explain that. Funnily enough, the first time I ever encountered Hare Krishna devotees was actually in my very first week of university, and it was on campus, and some local devotees had brought along a food cart to distribute prasad on campus, and I had no idea who they were, and I just remember asking a friend of mine who was with them, saying, who are those guys over there? And he just said, oh, they're the Hare Krishnas. And he said, but he did say something to me that really stuck with me and still sticks with me to this day, which is he said they feed people, and I thought that was really profound. Like, and I didn't actually go and take any prasad that day. I think I was a little bit. Maybe I felt a little a little out of my depth at that time in my life. I don't think I was particularly spiritual or at at that age. But that definitely always stuck with me. And in terms of how I think about my own service and things, feeding people and distributing food is one of my sort of real passions. And but fast forwarding a little bit, after leaving university, had 3 children with my then partner and wife, and we had a house in Leicester, and I sort of thought that everything that I had at that time was kind of, I felt like I was kind of set up for life. Everything was kind of, I thought I've got my home, I've got my family set up, we're working towards particular career paths, etc. And I thought, this is it, this is me sort of made, not that I'd been super financially successful, but I think I felt very comfortable, and I sort of thought this is forever. And then COVID happened, and things in my life took a very sort of sharp turn for the worse, shall we say. My marriage disintegrated over the course of a number of months. I went through a sort of real personal crisis. I ended up moving out of my family home with my children. I was very fortunate. Not long after I left home, I met a new partner, Rebecca, who you've spoken to, and we actually, it wasn't long until we were living all together as a family with my children, and so I saw kind of like this was like a new beginning for me, and I found myself a new job, and we had a new house that we were renting, and again I sort of found myself in another setup, and I thought, yeah, okay, so this is all happening again. I'm getting myself back on the sort of the material plane. Things are working out again. And then in the space of a week, I lost my job, my new job, and we found out we had to move house, and that all happened within the space of about 5 days. And then all of a sudden, again, I was like in this sort of crisis mode, like life's taken a big turn, and I didn't really know how to respond to that. But I think through something, I wasn't at the time, I wasn't sure what, but a few months prior to this all happening, to me losing my job, etc., a good friend of mine who I'd been talking to had mentioned a podcast to me. It wasn't your podcast, a podcast you might be familiar with called Wisdom of the Sages, which is hosted by Raghunath and Kaustuba Das. And every day on that podcast, they read the Srimad Bhagavatam and discuss the Bhagavatam. Now, I'd had a yoga practice for a number of years at this point. I was very much interested in yoga philosophy, but I'd never really delved into bhakti. Funnily enough, I had a copy of Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is on my shelf, which I'd acquired at a time where I'd just bought a lot of books on yoga and spirituality, and I had tried to read it. I had attempted to read it, but something at that time I hadn't really understood properly about it. But to go back to Wisdom of the Sages, I'd started listening to this podcast every day, nearly while I was working, and I think when my life sort of took another significant turn, I suddenly realized that I had this kind of toolkit for analyzing what was happening to me, and realizing that this is how material life works. That these sort of, I've read it described as like life quakes, things that just suddenly happen, and there's nothing you can really do about it. You just have, it's how you then go on and respond to those big events that count. So but I'd say listening to the wisdom of the Bhagavatam, like every day, I suddenly realized, this is happening now. All of these things I've been hearing about, this sort of temporary nature of the material world and of material life, this is it happening, and this is the time for, and I knew at that point that it was then time for me to sort of delve a little bit deeper. And I knew there was a community in Leicester. I knew there was a devotional community, because while listening to the podcast, I'd sort of done a little bit more research, but I still hadn't really taken a plunge. I hadn't gone along to any programs or anything like that. I was probably a little bit, I don't know, maybe a little shy to at the time. But I started going along. I went along to a local Kirtan group. That wasn't actually at the temple, it was at another yoga studio, but I knew it was run by devotees from the ISKCON temple in Leicester. And without, I'm not meaning to exaggerate in any way, but after going to that Kirtan for the first time, it was almost like a light switch had come on in me. I felt it's completely, in a way I'd never felt before. I'm a musician. You're not going to see my bass guitar that's sitting in the background there, but so music is something that's always spoken to me. I've always actually been a real lover of devotional music, devotional songs in various genres and styles, and something about hearing the Kirtan for the first time and participating just changed everything for me. And ever since then, I realized there and then that this was something that I needed to go even deeper with. And I managed the devotee who led the Kirtan group, who has since gone on to be my mentor at the temple, was very kind in guiding me through and helping me meet devotees, and and yeah, I'm probably rambling a little bit now.
No, you're not rambling at all. It's
but just trying to give you an idea of how I sort of went from, as I say, from having no real connection to anything bhakti related, but into into this world. So that's kind of how I got there initially. I got here initially.
I'm intrigued that you kind of had an interest in kind of yoga, kind of objectively to some extent, or not objectively. You had an interest in yoga philosophy, but you just didn't have time to kind of dig deeper. Busy man, 3 kids.
Yeah.
And because obviously in Leicester there must be so much going on from the kind of spiritual religious point of view. If you look at, I don't know much about Leicester, but I think there's a lot of groups that have philosophies that come from India, for example.
Yeah.
So there's so much variety to choose from. But you seem to, things that often happen as a coincidence. A Christian friend of mine calls it a God incidence. Krishna, God, arranges everything. And obviously you went down the path of bhakti. If you're hot, you can have a drink, by the way.
Oh, I've
got drinks having this. I'm not a massive fan.
I'm going to be able to combat the heat today. That's okay, but thank you. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just interested in that. I mean, obviously something happened to kind of lead you towards bhakti. Had you looked into other philosophies that came from India, or any other philosophies at all?
So I got into yoga. Funnily enough, and again, looking back on my journey so far, I think there were points that even though I think it was definitely in the sort of the COVID years, and then still sounds a funny thing to say, but the COVID sort of period, and then how that was very much the catalyst for a lot of this change. There were definitely stages of things that had taken place in my life prior to that were leading me towards this. So a very good friend of mine, who I'd met at like a parents group, he had a child of a similar age to mine, was a yoga teacher, and his partner was also a yoga teacher. But they weren't just the sort of, let's run the asana classes and then take your money and that's that. They were much more involved and interested in yoga philosophy. And quite early on, not long after I started practicing with them, they actually invited me into a sort of like a group of them and some other teachers who regularly met to chant the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali in Sanskrit. So I was exposed to this thing, chanting, chanting in Sanskrit in particular, and again, I'd never done anything like that before, and for me, it was a really powerful practice. It was very much it gave my asana practice a much deeper meaning, and it gave me a much better understanding of why I was practicing not only asana but pranayama, breathing, etc. And during that time when I was, to say, reading a lot of different books, I think with bhakti, I think I'd tried to read the Bhagavad Gita at that time, but I don't think it had spoken to me, because I think, like I alluded to a little earlier on, I think I felt quite content. I felt sort of, I don't know, maybe just the real core of the messages that of the Gita just weren't speaking to me at that time in my life, and therefore that's why it didn't become a big part of my practice back then. So yeah.
So you've kind of now been around the Hare Krishna movement for about a year, I think. So you're still, even though in your mind a lot might have happened over the last year or several years, or it's been 3 years since the pandemic, you're still kind of the new kid on the block.
Yeah.
How are you finding it? You kind of thrown yourself into the Krishna conscious community in Leicester. How's it going?
It's been an interesting year from the perspective of I think now I'm, say, about a year in, and having gone through like a full calendar year of all of the festivals and all of the happenings of, I feel, when I remember back at the sort of around this time last year when I was reading the Beginner's Guide to Krishna Consciousness book, which is a good little read. And I do still pick it up from time to time. It's
Is that by Bhakti Swami?
That's right. Yes, yeah. Correct. Yeah. And I remember reading just about all the different festivals and all of the sort of ritual and programs and artis and all of this. And at the time, I remember thinking, blimey, there's there's an awful lot to this. Like, and I'm never really going to get my head around everything that goes on. But I think the more we've gone through the past year, and the more I've sort of been around the movement and been around the temple and taking association of the devotees at the temple, I think I've realized that really, I think for me the importance is kind of focusing on the essence of the teachings. And I think the more I read Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Bhagavad Gita, there's just core themes, core principles that come up time and time again. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave us this model, gave us this this method, of chanting the holy names, which I believe, if that's where the focus is, all of the other stuff, all of the more sort of ceremonial, the more kind of extra bits, the more we focus on our chanting, the more we focus on our, on the Lord's name, the more that doesn't seem quite so overwhelming, because if we're in touch with that essence, that's really what matters. So I've tried to really focus as much as I can on that, and let the other stuff sort of come as it will,
So you've been going to the ISKCON Leicester temple. How have you been welcomed? I don't mean, did they give you a name badge? But how have you been received there? How's it going?
I think initially I very nearly walked. I haven't admitted this to anyone before, I don't think, but I very nearly walked away very, very early on. I went along to a larger kind of Kirtan event, and I didn't know anybody at the time apart from the devotee who I'd met through the smaller group that I'd been to initially, and I felt quite overwhelmed the first time I went. The first time I sort of went into a temple room and encountered deities, and I sort of, I think maybe I expected everyone to sort of start talking to me and be like, "Oh, hello, welcome," and it wasn't initially like that. But I went away, and I came back, and I think I was listening to wisdom. Funnily enough, these things often come about. I often find with spiritual life, the answers will come sometimes even when you're not really looking for them. And I think I remember listening to an episode of Wisdom of the Sages where they were talking about exactly this topic of, like, the first time we went to the temple, and we were expecting everyone to be like, yeah, welcoming you with open arms, but not necessarily being like that. And then you realizing, actually, no, Miko, this isn't necessarily about me. Like, I can't just come in and expect everyone just to sort of, be like, yeah. But the more I've gotten to know, the more association I've taken with devotees, the more welcome I felt. And in Leicester, our temple has a number of groups, which, for people who are quite new to the movement, that they can go along to. So I go to a group. I have been going to a group on a Wednesday evening called Sacred Lounge, where we always start with Kirtan, and then we have a class usually from one of our resident brahmachari monks, or sometimes guest speakers. And actually, we've had a couple of, it's been quite remarkable. We've had a couple of initiating gurus come along to lead the session when they've been at the temple for the week or something like that. So that's been quite amazing to be able to sort of take that sort of personal association with very advanced devotees, very advanced spiritual masters, and that has been a really lovely way to meet people. And the group encourages even people who are brand new to the temple to get involved in service. So obviously we've just had Janmashtami, and a lot of the members of the group were helping our big celebration we had on Thursday night. So yeah,
was that your first Janmashtami?
It was my first Janmashtami.
And how did you find it? What did you think?
It was terrific. I'll be very honest with you. I didn't stay all night, but it was terrific. I mean, I think one of the things that has become very clear to me about Leicester is that is just how much how involved. Obviously, I go to the ISKCON temple, but as you said at the beginning, there are a lot of Hindu temples here in Leicester. I think there are around 9,500 Hindus living in Leicester,
Wow.
and so we have a big wider community of Hindus here. And so often our events that we have for our big festivals are usually very widely attended by people from all over the city, and even outside, because Leicester, obviously, people, it's quite easy to get to. It's nice and central in the middle of the country, so it's often a hub for people coming to visit. So yeah, it was a terrific. I think we had, I don't know how many people we had actually in the end, but the line for darshan by the time I left at about 9:30 was going all the way, like, out of the building down to the entrance. So there was an awful lot of people. And yeah, so I felt very, the more I've gotten involved, the more I've felt very welcome, and really we've gotten to know some of the devotees incredibly well. And yeah, that's.
And I know you're only kind of a year in to some extent, and you've talked about meeting some gurus, and I guess my question is going to be: have you thought about the future? I mean, it's a silly question. We've all thought about the future. I'd like to think. I mean, you're a guy with kids. You have to think about the future. But in terms of your spiritual life, have you already, after you started to think about kind of initiation, or what that looks like, how that feels? Because that's kind of different for different people. How is that working in your head for you?
I have thought about it. So I've recently started working, say, with a mentor at the temple, and I one of the gurus who visited us and gave us a class. I did feel I was very taken by him. It was of all of the sort of spiritual masters I've been in the presence of, I did feel sort of, yeah, very, very, very attracted to him in many ways. And so I have spoken to my mentor about this, and he has asked me, because we have there's a subdivision of our temple called the College of Vedic Studies in Leicester, and they run courses. The initial courses are about the Bhagavad Gita, there's one called Bhakti Life, there's one called Gita Life, and they sort of help people sort of, you know, study the Shastras. And there's actually a disciple course as well, which I've been recommended to attend this year. So yes, it is definitely on my mind. But for me, I've always said that I've always thought about it. It's not just a box I want to tick, and obviously it's not a it's a very, very big decision, a very, very big commitment. And from what I, you know, from my understanding of it so far of the process, so absolutely is something that's.
I mean, my advice would be to take your time.
Yes.
Don't rush into anything. It's like getting married, isn't it? Don't rush into anything. Make sure it's right for you and the other person. I mean, Prabhupada, he took it was 11 years. So he met his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, in 1922, and didn't receive initiation formally until 1933. So it was 11 years. I joined the movement initially in 2004, and it wasn't until 2017 that I received formal initiation. So what's that, 13 years? You know, and I was kind of following someone before. I mean, whatever that means, kind of, you know, and it, you know, just didn't kind of work out. But you kind of know when the spiritual master, I'm not a big fan of the word master. It sounds very, of the teacher, the guide, the guru, you know, when it's right for you. And it's so important to spend time with them and get to know them. And, you know, for me personally, the guru that I did take initiation from in the end, this might sound a bit silly. One of the things that impressed me about him is that despite having thousands of disciples around the world, he personally responded to my email within 24 hours. I was like, wow. For me, that was so important that he took the time to send me an email. That kind of was a big thing. But I think it's good to kind of shop around. It's like Krishna Consciousness. It's a supermarket, but shop around, see what the options are. And within the institution, or the mat, so it's a technical word, the mat of ISKCON, there's around 80 different initiating gurus, and they'll all have, well, they should all be following Prabhupada, but kind of under that, they'll have different like interests. Like some will have a big focus on Kirtan, some on prasadam distribution, some on academic research, some on, you know, having better relationships with your friends and family. So you have to kind of work out what's right for you.
Interestingly enough, the individual who and I've actually been speaking to a couple of his disciples who I've got to know better through working, just recently joining the Avanti Fields School here in Leicester. He has a particular interest in education, and I think it explains a lot why I say two disciples of his I've actually met at the school and I've been talking to quite extensively, and they've been very sort of encouraging, shall we say. Like they've been saying, you know, you should absolutely make some contact, and you know, he'd be thrilled to hear from you, because we had a good conversation when he was in Leicester. So yeah, but as you're saying, I think it's for me, it's not just a box to be ticked. It's not just because again, I understand the significance of it, and I would only want to proceed with it when I felt really ready to take that next step. And I in the past when I've I mean, this doesn't feel like it as sort of just an interest. Like I'm the sort of person that has, over the course of my life, had quite a number of quite significant interests, and have gotten into things quite quickly. But this doesn't feel the same way for me. This isn't just another hobby or another just a fleeting fancy. It's definitely it's changed the entire way I look at my life and the purpose of my life, and how I want to go forward living it. So I know for a fact that this is, you know, but as I said, it's always worth, you know, still treading cautiously in respect, because one doesn't want to bite off more than one can chew, in a sense.
Before I ask a question about your job, because I want to have a great chat about that, can I just ask about kind of the Western community at ISKCON Leicester? Because obviously, when I think of Leicester, I think of a city. Is it a city or a town? What's it?
It's a city, yeah. It's a
city with
12th largest city in the UK.
Wow. I wonder what the other 11 are. um, so
Let's not say her name.
so it's got a very big Indian community, lots of people of Indian heritage. In terms of the Western, which is a politically correct term for saying white, but in terms of the Western community, ISKCON Leicester, what's it like?
So I think I visited a few temples now, all of which I would say have had a Western majority congregation. Leicester is the big exception to that, and it's very much reflective of the ethnic makeup of the city. Leicester will be the first city in the UK, I think is it by 2030 or maybe slightly later, that will be in the first non-Western majority in terms of and in terms of its ethnic diversity. So I think that's, the Leicester community very much reflects that. But for me, Leicester's never had. I mean, there was a bit of last year. There was seemingly some like troubles in Leicester, like there were at a few points across the country between Hindus and Muslims, and that was making national headlines, but that was very unusual for Leicester. Like, it's not something that we've traditionally had a great history of sort of conflict between ethnic groups, particularly in the last sort of 30-40 years. And like I live in an area of the city, for example, which is very much reflective of that too. And it was something that very much attracted me to here in the first place, because, as I say, I grew up somewhere where that was just non-existent, and I don't know why, but I always found that slightly difficult. I think maybe because I grew up around some other places that my parents were from that were a lot more diverse, and that's how I kind of always wanted my children to be somewhere that was like that. But in terms of how I felt like welcomed into the community here, like I haven't felt race and has ever really come into it. And like if we're practicing what we're preaching, that's as Lord Krishna says, he resides in the heart of every living being, not just Hindus or any of the Indians, so it's and that's we're all spirit souls, and I like I think that's how it should be.
I like that approach, which actually is the approach, or should be the approach, of Krishna consciousness. We're not the body isn't who we really are. For some reason, some bizarre reason, you and I are appearing as white British men in this life, but we both might reappear as Chinese women, or I don't know. I mean, I'm me, a Chinese woman. You, what could you be? A Hawaiian woman.
Yep.
I don't know. I've just made that up. And we have no idea why. Let's talk about your job. Let's talk about your kind of what you do in the day and the weekday. You work at the Krishna Fields Avanti School in Leicester.
Yeah.
Sounds like an amazing place to work. Tell us a bit about the school, what your role is there, and what inspired you to apply for the job.
So the Avanti Fields School in Leicester is part of the Avanti Schools Trust, which was started in 2010 by a group of devotees, most of whom were based at the Bhaktivedanta Manor, I believe, at the time. And the idea was that they wanted to establish state-funded schools that were faith schools, but adopted the sort of the ethical and philosophical components of sort of our key texts, Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, etc., into the curriculum. So we have a document called the Avanti Way, which even though our schools, as I say, teach the national curriculum, this is sort of woven into the philosophy of the school and the kind of the core values and principles of our school. And as such, we have there is collective worship in the classroom with prayers. We have weekly. We have a temple at our school, so we have Sri Sri Gaura Nitai up in our worship hall. So it's the most amazing feeling to be able to come into work every morning and go and take darshan of them before starting the day. It's Srila Prabhupada is hanging in our in our reception area, which is again is lovely to come into in the morning and to be reminded of kind of what we're here doing. And there are two Avanti Trust schools in Leicester: the Krishna Avanti Primary School, or CAPS as it's called around here, which was actually the first school in the entire trust in the country. And then the Avanti Fields, where I work, is actually an all-through school. So we have a primary school and a secondary school. Initially, it was just opened as a secondary school, but the building that we moved to in 2018 was built to accommodate a primary school as well. So I actually work in the primary school, but because the approach of the trust is not to just open a school and cram it full of kids and then just have a full school straight away, like with the secondary school, each year a new year has been added to the school. So at the moment in the primary school, we just have from nursery to year one. And that's the extent of the primary school, whereas the secondary school is full. But I took so like we talked about at the beginning, I have an academic background, and something I really had thought about doing quite a lot since finishing my studies was getting involved in teaching and education. And actually last year, when after things in my life had taken again another major turn, and I was thinking, well, what am I going to do next? And this was before I sort of found my way into Krishna consciousness. I thought about teaching once more, and I actually started filling out the initial application for a PGCE. And then for whatever reason, like life just didn't seem, things at the time just didn't seem right. I kind of felt like I was just doing it for any reason. It was like just going to be another job. And I didn't feel inspired to actually take that step and make application. Because again, going back to university again, to completing a PGCE, and after having been at university for 10 years already, it seemed like that's going to be a big commitment, and my heart's really going to have to be in this to want to do it. So we at the Avanti Fields School, the all-through school where I work. At the moment, ISKCON Leicester actually has most of its Sunday programs at the school, because our temple has been undergoing renovation. We've got big historic old bank building in the middle of Leicester, which had to have a brand new roof put on it, and it's been a whole thing that cost a lot of money, and it's taken a lot of time. But
it's been going on for a while, hasn't it? I mean, I remember visiting about 6-7 years ago, and it was an issue then.
Yeah, it is. So the roof is now good. The roof is now sealed, but there's a few kind of internal bits that still need doing. But the facilities at Avanti Fields, because we've got the temple room there, we've got a wonderful place to just have prasadam afterwards. It's just a really good venue to have the Sunday program. So that's what we've been doing. So I'd been kind of going to the school for the programs, and I'd sort of looked around, but funnily enough, like with a lot of things, it didn't initially hit me like, well, maybe this is somewhere I could work. But a few months ago, I was listening to the Wisdom of the Sages podcast, and Nitesh Gore, the CEO of the Avanti Trust, was interviewed on the podcast, and I just found his words incredibly inspiring. He really he set out a sort of a model of education that really chimed with me, and I could tell that this was a trust that really took their role very seriously, that they believed in delivering top-notch education and having really excellent schools by standard school criteria, by the standard criteria of how schools are assessed. But they also wanted to deliver much more than just that education. And there and then on that very day, when I listened to that interview, I went onto the trust's website just to see if there were any positions going at the school, and they were advertising for teaching assistants in the primary school. So I sent in an application, and a month later I'd been offered the job. So again, it was just, I felt for me going in at a TA level was probably a good thing to do, because I had even though I've done various things throughout my sort of working life that have involved teaching and training and things like that, I've never directly worked with young children apart from my own children. So I felt that would be a good level to go into. And I know, having been there a little, about a month or so now, the trust are very keen on, if there are people who are, interested in going on and training to be teachers and things, that there are routes to that. I've spoken to the head teacher about that. So again, we'll see what happens in the future. It's not necessarily, again, like with other things, it's not necessarily just going to be a box tick. It's like I'm not attached to that end goal too much. Like this is where I must get to in order for me. I'm very happy in the role I've joined in. But we'll see. I feel that there is scope there for progression, and say the first few weeks have been definitely challenging at times, but incredibly rewarding. I mean, I work with special educational needs children in years 1 and reception, and they are such lovely kids, and it feels like I'm very much in the right place where I am now.
It sounds like your life has really not turned upside down, but kind of 18 months ago, a lot's happened in the last 12 to 13 months. You've been on this kind of whirlwind adventure or experience. You've joined the local Hare Krishna temple. You're effectively working in a Hare Krishna school. That might not be how it's phrased, but and those things 2 years ago certainly might not have been on your list of things to do.
No, not at all. But I think what I've realized is that life is, as I said, everything I thought was permanent in my life, everything I thought in the past was, this is me, this is my identity now. Like you said to me when we started the podcast, or maybe when we were chatting just before, or maybe I should call you Dr. Jack. Like again, I don't feel I necessarily need to identify myself with my academic past, with my qualifications. But I also, it's very much given me a belief that life is for living, and every moment that we have here now in this life, we need to use it to the best, for the best means, doing the best we can. And the school has given me an opportunity where I feel like I can serve the community here, and live authentically through doing it.
And how, I hadn't planned to ask you this, but in terms of your children, are they young? Are they?
My eldest son is now 12, but he's just, so we had children fairly young. I was 24 when he was born, so he's actually in his second year of high school now. My youngest daughter is 6, so there's a bit of an age spread there. But yeah, they none of them are currently at Avanti Fields.
And how do they feel about their dad kind of joining the Hare Krishnas, getting involved with Krishna Consciousness?
It's been interesting, actually. So one thing I didn't mention earlier on when I was talking about my sort of just how I got to this point was that back in 2017, just prior to me practicing yoga and doing everything this, I actually went vegan. I'd been a meat eater for 30 years, and I had a bit of a bad year health-wise when I turned 30. Just nothing really serious, but a couple of things that were like not giving me indications that I kind of needed to change some things in my life from a health perspective. And I had a minor operation for a hernia back at the end of 2017. And a couple of weeks into my recovery after that, we'd just gone away for a short break in Norfolk, I think we were. And we went to a vegan restaurant for lunch just on the way back. And I don't know what it was, but I thought, this makes a lot of sense. Like, I don't know why I can't eat like this all the time. It's and so that very same day, I never ate meat again after that. And actually I've been, say, fully vegan since 2017.
Wow.
And when I made that decision, I never intended to sort of, so I was still with my ex-partner at that time, and living with my children with her. And I never sort of intended them to do it necessarily. This was something I was doing for myself. And but my eldest son, he actually, after a couple of months of me doing this, he kind of took an interest, and he said, Daddy, I'm gonna do it with you now as well. And he decided he wanted to do it. And then my middle son, who's now 10, he was probably 6 at the time, He sort of joined in with his brother and said, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna join you as well. I'm gonna be vegan as well." And they've both stuck with that all the way through, like since then. And we would say we're a completely vegan family now. And Krishna consciousness has sort of, I've sort of taken a similar approach. I don't feel that sort of pushing it upon them is a good idea in some respect, because I think kids have obviously got that tendency to, you know, to just be like, no, I don't want that's not cool. I don't want to take part in that. But I suppose what I've tried to do is really just model it to them, like I did with my dietary change. And my youngest daughter has really taken an interest. I mean, she loves coming to the temple. She loves chanting. She had a lovely time at sorry, not Rath Yatra. She did have a lovely time at Rath Yatra earlier in the year, but at Janmashtami the other night, she was jumping up and down and chanting. And then we went to all the way home in the car. And my eldest son as well. He actually said to me when we were swinging Shri Shri Radha Madhava, just as we were taking darshan the other night. He said to me afterwards. He said, "Oh, Dad, I felt something there like I've never felt before." And he said to me, "Can you buy me some beads, some japa beads, some chanting beads?" And I said, "Of course I did. I bought them some from the table that was selling bits and bobs, and I took them to the pujari, and he blessed them for him. And he's been texting me over the last few days saying like, "Oh, I've chanted 6 rounds today. I've chanted, you know, how many?" And he really seems to want to tell me. So I very much believe that these, you know, these names, this is so powerful that we don't need to necessarily, like, you know, particularly with younger people, like if we can model this to them, if we can just show them, like, you know, how powerful this is, that they will take, you know, they'll do their own thing. And again, I whether or not all of them end up to be devotees or not, it's, you know, I'm just gonna keep it present in the household and keep offering our food, and, you know, keep chanting in the house, and just make it something that's normalized to them. Because again, like myself, they haven't grown up with this in their culture. They haven't you know, they haven't grown up in a devotee family. So it's just, yeah, just making it a regular everyday thing, and seeing where it goes.
Children are very receptive, aren't they? They can
Yeah.
adapt easily, or more easily than adults. I think that sounds wonderful, that your children are kind of, through their own choice, kind of on this journey with you, not just in the diet that they've chosen to follow, but the spiritual things as well. But I imagine, living in Leicester, going to school in Leicester, they're going to meet people from different cultures anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. I think my son's 2 best friends at school, and he goes, yeah, in a different part of Leicester. He goes to school. 2 of his best friends are Hindus, from Hindu families, and they've had some really interesting discussions about, you know, sort of differences in practice between what their family does and what we do, but just seeing sort of commonalities and things. And again, I think that's one of the really great things about this city. And it was clear for me, particularly when, I say, at Janmashtami the other night, when we had so many people from outside of our you know, our congregation, so to speak, our community, come in, but also at Rath Yatra, when we take the chariots down, there's an area of Leicester called the Golden Mile, Belgrave Road, and it's where the vast majority of Indian families, Hindu families, live in the city. And just to see the people coming out onto the streets to see Lord Jagannath, and wanting to sort of, you know, take off their shoes and come out into the street and to get near to the deities and things, it was quite remarkable. Like, I didn't know how significant it was to a much broader remit of people, and that's been very special, you know, to see that here.
It's wonderful. Well, I can feel your enthusiasm, and I can feel your just kind of genuine interest in the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. I mean, that sounds a bit kind of, I could just, I remember being new, not saying you've been doing it a long time, it becomes a bit jaded, or you lose, what's that word? You lose it's not such a novelty anymore. But
Yeah.
I remember when I first joined, and I just remember that kind of feeling of having this magical experience, this kind of magical experience of,
Yeah.
you know, wow, where have I been all of these years? There's
Mm.
these smells, there's this spiritual practice, there are these deities, there's this way of dressing which I've never dressed like before. So yeah, and I guess I've also appreciated your honesty kind of throughout this podcast as well. And I am personally, I'm passionate about Krishna consciousness. I'm passionate about sharing it with people, and in particular with people of Western heritage, because Prabhupada gave up so much, he sacrificed so much, he took such a risk, boarding that cargo ship in 1965 to go to the United States, for us Western sinners. And I love the fact people like you, ordinary everyday people, you're not ordinary, are joining, and that's why Prabhupada came, to attract people like us to the movement. Believe it or not, Jack, Dr. Jack, believe it or not, we've been chatting for an hour almost.
Oh, wow.
It's
Wow.
quite amazing. I've really appreciated you giving up your time on a very hot Saturday.
Oh, yes.
It's boiling, isn't it? I stopped watching the weather years ago, but I probably should have watched it this week for the warnings. So I think I'm going to say goodbye to the viewers at home, and you and I can have a brief debrief after. But Jack, I have really appreciated your time, being our 81st guest. And I think you're the first guest that's kind of new to Krishna consciousness, in the sense that you've shared a story, or you've shared an angle that others haven't shared. So I've really, really appreciated that. And I think you're possibly our first guest from Leicester. Maybe. I have to think about that. I can't remember all 80 in a row. So a big thank you to Jack for being our 81st guest on the Hare Krishna Project podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do put a positive, constructive comment. Please do like it, and please do hit that all important subscribe button, so you can stay tuned about future podcasts and video updates. And if you're watching this on Facebook, please do put a constructive comment, like, love, or care for it. And also like and or follow the Hare Krishna Project page. We've got more guests coming up over the next few weeks, including lots of other news, which you'll find out if you follow the page. And also another plug for our brand new website, the harekrishnaproject.org.uk. We have a new website which talks about the work that we're doing across the country to promote something that's important to us: inclusion. We're a project that believes very strongly in inclusion, including people in Krishna consciousness. So check out the website, the harekrishnaproject.org.uk. So until next week, we'll see you all soon. Thank you. Hare Krishna.